I was one of those people that, like, before I'd even like moved the furniture into the house, I had already drawn out, my new garden. And then we moved to this house, and that was in 2008. And it was shade, and it was rocky, and it was a hillside in the back, and then there were the deer out front. And so I relearned how to garden.
Welcome back to the Beet Podcast. I'm your host today, Jacques, and today we have Pam Penick, a Texas gardener. I think I could call you that now. You've been gardening there for quite some time. And you also wrote a really cool new book called Gardens of Texas. And we will talk about this because I really, really love the book. Especially, I'll say the photography is amazing. But first, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us about how you garden, where you garden, and a little of your background there.
Sure, yeah. I'm happy to be talking with you. Love the hat. Wish I was wearing a hat right now. That looks awesome. You look like you're ready for the garden.
I am ready. Immediately after this, I'm like,
you're
straight
going
into
right
the
out
garden.
there, yeah. I'm gardening in Austin, Texas, which is kind of right in the middle of the state for those who don't really know where Austin sits.
It's a big state.
It's a big state. It sure is. And I've been here, as you mentioned. I didn't grow up here. I grew up in the Southeast. But came to Texas to go to college, and then after a brief stint back on the East Coast, I ended up here about 30 years ago. So it feels like home. I feel like a Texas gardener now after all these years, but I sure wasn't when I arrived, and that was a learning curve for sure. Not just because I was totally new to gardening at that time, and that just hadn't done much of it.
Oh,
but,
yeah, sure.
But it was just a different climate than what I had grown up in, and the kind of plants that were available to me. I mean, I did the whole thing of trying to grow what I had grown back on the East Coast, and it didn't work. So that was my first introduction to gardening here, and it really kind of informed the direction that I would go as a gardener. I didn't know at the time that I would really get into it so much as I have, but that just happened along the way.
Yeah, because where you're coming from to Texas, I guess, is the biggest change that you had there. I guess soil is a big difference in Texas, I'm sure, or maybe lack of soil depending on where you are. And then the extreme heat and the way that the rain comes to you in Texas is also probably a little bit different. So yeah. I think you guys are mostly monsoonal. I don't know if that's true across the state.
Actually, that's only true in the western half of the state. So really far west Texas for sure, which is in the Chihuahuan Desert. But we are in subtropical part of Texas here, so we're really affected by the Gulf of Mexico and all the moisture that comes up from the Gulf. So we're not like a dry desert climate here at all. A lot of people kind of think of Texas that way. But
yeah, I don't know where
really
that comes from. But
yeah, well, I think it's from the movies, honestly.
Yeah,
like
I guess
the images of John Wayne riding across Texas on his horse, and it's probably like always out in California, honestly, in the movies. But
that's true.
It affects how people see Texas, and we are huge. So it's like, I don't know. I mean, California is gigantic too, so you know what that's like, and probably a huge range of growing conditions there. But like, just to put it in perspective here, like if you're in Beaumont, like in the southeast part of the state, like that's east of Houston even, they can get like 60 inches of rain a year, 50 to 60 inches of rain there. And then if you go all the way west to El Paso, then it's like 10 or 15 inches of rain. And so it's just depending on where you, like there's not like a book that says here's what you do in Texas, or if it were, it would have to really explain all the different regions of how you would garden here, because it just, like you said, there's the monsoon on the west, and on the east it's like hurricanes and lots of rain, and then we're right in the middle here in Austin. Like we're on the corridor of Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, and that's pretty different from those other two regions.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the biggest states in like the contiguous United States with Texas and California, I think in California you go from basically zone 0 up to like 10B, maybe even 11A in some parts, because you have like the really tall mounds. If you are going to actually garden up there, maybe you probably won't. And then like where I am in San Diego, it's interesting because it is very mild here, but it is also very dry. So this last year, where our average rainfall is like 10 to 12 inches, but this last year was 4 inches, like 4.5. So it was I think the worst year on record for us, but it's still so mild that like, we don't get into those high hundreds or even high 90s, that it's not like, things can still survive a year of a really bad drought because they won't get roasted in the middle of the summer. But yeah, like it's such a big state and so many different growing zones. Even in the book, I think, yeah, you split it into 5 separate sections, like central, west, south, north, east. And even within those, you could, I'm sure, subdivide it again and again and again.
I'm sure you
as
could.
you get into different regions. Yeah.
And those weren't divided by growing zones so much as just
Right.
kind of accessibility for me, and just kind of how you think of the culture of the state. Like on the eastern side of Texas, it's more of the South. A lot of people call it kind of like that's still part of the South, whereas where we are, it's more the gateway to the Southwest. And then if you go out to far west Texas, like Marfa, Alpine, those places, it's definitely more, it's desert. That's desert climate. So yeah, there's a lot going on here. I was surprised really to discover how much myself when I started working on the book.
As you've also been gardening there, you've gone through a lot of really challenging years. I know the past couple years in particular, like the past maybe 5 years or whatever that time range is, has been pretty challenging for Texas, and gardeners across the state. So why don't you give everyone a little bit of a summary of the trials and tribulations you guys went through over these past couple years?
You're ready for the woe is me.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like a real part of it. It's right. Like, it's interesting because in the book, as you talk to these different gardeners, like just to give a little more preface on the book, I think you cover somewhere in the almost like 30 different like gardens and the people behind those gardens. And some of them talk about like, if the plant isn't supposed to be here and it dies, then that's fine. And I have to find something else. And through these past couple of years, I think a lot of people have had to go through that experience in a very real way because of what you guys have experienced. So it's really fun to see how people are taking these challenges and not just like, woe is me, but like saying, oh, you know what? I could adapt around this. I could find plants that work still, or maybe I expand into something else that, there's a blend of native plants, but also plants that also do well in the region. And it was cool to hear the perspective from people like, being a purist is fine in one thing, but I've never been one to be all in on one thing and think there's only one way to do something. So it was really fun to see all those different layers within the book as well, because people are gardening in different ways.
I don't think I met a single purist, to be honest. And there are people who were certainly gardening with more native plants or in a certain way than others. But that was part of the beauty of just seeing how people were. It was either their interest, what plants they kind of fell in love with or had changed to, or just, they wanted to create habitat, or no, this person is more interested in making kind of an artistic garden. It really was all kinds, and I wanted to represent that. But yeah, like I did joke about woe is me because, I mean, as gardeners, don't we all love to complain about the weather?
Of course,
and,
of course.
It goes with the territory. And
I've been complaining about the rain all year.
Yeah, well, I went 4 inches. I'm like, woe is you, yeah. But but that's the thing. Like, we complain about the weather, but then you just carry on and you get on with it and you figure out ways to work with what you have, and like, the constraints of what you're dealing with will determine the kind of garden that you have, or else you'll give up. And who wants to give up? We all are passionate about making beautiful gardens. And a lot of times the information that comes trickling down to us in Texas from, gardening media, it seems like it's really focused on the coast. At least that's how it seemed to me over the decades of gardening here. You'll pick up a great gardening book that you want to read, and it's really focused on the East Coast or the Pacific Northwest or California. And it's not like you can't get great design ideas from that. You can. It's not like you can never grow any of those plants. But really, it feels like kind of like you're reading information that maybe was written from another planet sometimes. It just doesn't have the direct relevance to us that I've learned over the years, in terms of like the season when you'll plant or how you'll adapt to winter, because our winters are so mild compared to much of the U.S. Probably not for you. Your winter is much more mild than ours is. But
we don't get snows or freezes.
You don't get freezes. That helps.
Yeah.
That changes things. And there's Florida. There's the southern half of the U.S. certainly is different, but it feels like sometimes we're on our own little planet as far as growing conditions, and so that's a learning curve right there. And I think a lot of times gardeners here have come early to the whole idea of using native plants, of being very water wise, of doing these kind of sustainable things, because that allows you to garden here. like, it's not like those are the only plants that will grow here, but I think maybe we have come to those kind of plants, that kind of idea of thinking about gardening because we have to, because that's what will succeed here. And I find that really refreshing. Like, I feel like it puts us kind of on the leading edge of how maybe a lot of gardeners across the US will start rethinking the ways that they garden over time, because it's not like climate change is just going to visit us here in Texas or you in California. It's going to affect all of us, and we're all going to have more extremes of whatever it is we're already dealing with. And so we'll all have to get more creative in terms of adapting to those, whether it's too much rain or too little rain, or, too much heat or too much cold. It's going to be too much of something.
Too much of something, yeah, absolutely.
It'll keep us on our toes, but I found it really refreshing to talk to all these gardeners and see that they were, the evidence was right there in front of my eyes when I scouted the gardens, because I could see all the beauty and the habitat that they were making. But when I did have those conversations with them to hear kind of the why the drive is there for them to create the garden and to keep the garden, that's really what I was interested in digging into. And then on top of that, to say, hey, we've all been going through these extreme weather events the last few years, like you say, the last 5 years. How are you adapting? What are you doing? Are you thinking about things differently? And I didn't expect any one gardener, much less the whole 27 gardeners that I featured, to have the answer. Nobody does, but I wanted to know just the ways they were rethinking it, anything they were doing differently, how they were still finding the positive energy. Because I talk to a lot of gardeners, my friends and I are on a daily chat about gardening, and sometimes it can feel like, like the climate is conspiring against you. Like, all this knowledge that you've gotten from 10 or 20 years of gardening or whatever, and suddenly the weather starts changing and you think, do I still know how to garden here? And that can kind of throw you for a loop. So I like to think about it as like, we're all in the same boat. We're all figuring it out together as we go along. And by sharing these stories and talking with these gardeners, we can all learn from each other. And that's really what it's all about.
Absolutely. And I have to say, like, it does really come across through the book. So it's the way that it's set up, as I was saying, like with the 27 gardeners, there's a little bit of backstory into like how they started gardening, why they built the garden the way they did, and then the beautiful pictures displaying it all. And to me, it's even actually inspired a lot of thought for myself into how I want to approach some of the landscaping, like in my front yard and those kinds of areas. And I have been thinking about and planting native plants in my yard now for a couple of years. But I think it's really important to not just talk about it, but to see a grown out example of what it looks like when it's properly intentionally planned and laid out as a landscape. And again, like, not necessarily being so purist about it, but mixing in other things that you might like as well, or that do well in the region, is totally fine. But it's great to come from the perspective and to see like, wow, that is a absolutely beautiful landscape. And to hear like, oh, a good chunk of these, or majority, was native sourced or native plants, like, that's amazing. And it was also really interesting to see like across all these different gardeners, like there was one woman who had the garden, I think it was in Central Texas, where maybe in the Austin area, where she talked about how it was set up to really explode in the springtime, and then when it gets too hot in the like late summer, it's fine. It mostly goes dormant and kind of disappears. But that's also the time where she's like, I'm not really spending that much time directly outside in the daytime because it's really hot anyway. So she's cultivated in a way where she talks about how like, if something doesn't want to live here, then that's fine. I just won't plant it again, and I will allow whatever wants to survive here to survive. And it will look amazing, and it will be very intentional for this wonderful period of time that I want to enjoy it. And then after that, there's obviously still some beauty. It's just not going to be like covered in blooms in the same way, or things like that.
Yeah,
and there's
that was
other
Ruthie Burris. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
she's very.
That was
pragmatic.
a beautiful property.
Yes,
yeah.
It certainly is, and she's done like she designed that herself. And it's amazing.
Beautiful. Yeah. Yes. And outside, the other one that I'm thinking of right now in the moment was there was a couple who they were really into the grasses, and I love grasses, and especially the textures and the colors and the way that they move throughout the seasons. So it's really cool to see them basically plant out like a mixture of a landscape with like big, essentially like prairies that they recreated in their property with these wonderful blue native grasses and different colors and textures and movements. And it doesn't have to just be like one thing or one type of plant, or your goals can also be multivariable. Like if you want a lot of movement and texture, you could go one way. If you want a lot of color, you could go another way. So it's just like really lovely to see all these different options.
Yeah, right? I mean, gosh, there are so many different styles of gardens you can do. And like if you were to, I don't know, like hire 10 different garden designers for your front yard, imagine how many different looks and kind of planting ideas you could get. So there's always like this idea, I think, when you're doing your own garden, of where do I even start, you know? So I did love that I could like show different styles. Like it's not just naturalistic gardens, it's not just native plant gardens, it's not all formal gardens. It's a range, because that's what people are out there doing. And so that was part of the joy for me. And I absolutely agree that grassland garden, I think you're talking about the one in Marfa, Jim Martinez
Yes,
designed.
Marfa. Yeah.
Yeah. It was really stunning to see. And like, they were hugely motivated by bird watching. So part of it was creating a bird habitat and, you know, those seeds and the grasses for the birds. And yeah, that one was a really special one for sure.
Yeah, and actually, I did write down the quote from the previous gardener you were talking about. I already forgot her name that you just mentioned, Ruthie.
Yeah.
She said, "If you don't want to live here, you cannot live here."
Yeah. She's like,
I love that.
Yeah, she is so matter of fact, and her experience was like super valuable too, because she came to Austin from the wet side of Houston, or of Texas. She came from Beaumont, which is like that 60 inches of rain. Yeah, so she had the experience even within Texas of what the heck, how do I relearn to garden in this place? Yeah, and she did. She figured it out.
Yeah, definitely figured it out. And actually, it does remind me, within like, for example, that section, one of the things that I really liked was, I'm a vegetable gardener. I grow a lot of fruits and vegetables. I love eating out of the garden, but I don't really have like a landscaper's mind or think about the terms and the way that people are so intentional and creative when it comes to really landscaping. But one of the interesting things, like, you would break down within those gardens like a key section of their garden and what it's called and how to make use of that in your space. So I think for hers, it was called the foundation bed. I was like, foundation bed? I've never heard such a term. And then I quickly realized it's just like the bed around the foundation of your house, I guess. I was like, oh, okay. That makes sense.
Maybe that's a Texas term. I don't know.
I mean, it might just be in the landscaping world of something I just don't think about. But
it's like
it made a lot of sense.
Right? Like, I mean, how many times for foundation beds, like when you think about what's planted right up against the house, it's like your little mustache hedge, like the traditional, it's just like a little pruned mustache hedge, and maybe like a tree, a small ornamental tree at the corner, or an upright, cypress or something, and that's it. And I mean, the options are so much bigger than that.
Yeah. And like a lot of people had beautiful ones too. Like, and I think the one right after that where the guy was talking about building a crevice garden, and it was really funny to think about him planning out the space, because he said at one point they got like basically 5-gallon buckets full of sand, and they put like stakes in it and laid it out where they thought the plants would go, and then walked up and down the street to see like, okay, if the plant's there, if that stake is sticking up, is that going to block people from being able to see in my house? And I was like, oh, that's like so smart and clever as a way to like fully lay out your area and be able to visualize. Yeah, I was like, fantastic. Like it sounds silly and obvious, like why would you need that? But if you're putting in like 12 plants, you could imagine it in your head, but when you see it all laid out with like sticks, and then you could fill out that texture with your mind, then you're like, oh, okay, I understand how this is going to look now, and I could feel it. And so it's just really fun for me to think about different ways of how I want to adjust my garden or escape different sections. And just the idea of these foundation beds also is cool to think about, because, I think Ruthie was talking about like you want some different heights so that you have some filtered light, but not fully blocking all the light, and make sure like the pathway coming into your door is like very welcoming and not like it's overgrown and trying to hide your house, because you want people to feel like they're being like brought into a wonderful, beautiful spot without like necessarily like making it feel overburdening or heavy or dark.
I mean, one of the tips that I've always heard is like, think about if your house just fell over on its face. Like if you tipped your house over on its face, like how deep would that be? And so if you have a 2-story house, it might be deeper. Maybe that would be too deep. That might be your whole yard if you got a small yard. But for like a 1-story, like just kind of think about expanding it out, because it's so easy to do like a 3-foot bed along your foundation. That's what the builder will put in, and maybe that's what lives on, for years until you buy your house and you got this little 3-foot bed that maybe doesn't even get out from under the eave, so like it never gets any rain because it's in the rain shadow. So yeah, that's why I wanted to use Ruthie's example as a way to like pull out that little design tip for people, just a way to bump that bed out, and then even better, like give yourself a little pathway behind the plants so that you can have maintenance done. You can do painting when you need to. You can clean your windows, without tromping on all your plants.
That's a big one.
Yeah. It's just
I can say from personal
things,
experience.
Yeah, same. So, it's like if we could do it over again, how should we do it?
I know. There's like where the water main comes into our house was like severely overgrown with this like crazy bush. And then one day, like the pipe coming up to it cracked and was just like spraying water, and I had to like hack my way into the area just to get to that spot so I could fix it. And I was like, oh man, I need to clear this out a bit. This is like out of control. I can't even get into my space that I need to do things.
Well, all this said, I am not a believer that there is only one right way to do things. And I could easily imagine some jungly, wonderfully intimate garden that I would totally love to photograph as well. So, this again is just one example. It's one design tip. It doesn't mean it's written in stone for anybody, but it's just something to take under consideration and see if that would work for you.
Yeah, and actually the other one, the crevice garden, is kind of talking about that, because I think that's a term that I've probably heard before, but haven't really thought about. But even in the book, the homeowner was talking about like the crevice garden is usually something like alpine, where it's maybe like plants up in the mountains growing between the rocks that are naturally fractured and filling in with soil. But he wanted to bring it down into a more desert landscape, and so he had to play with the different plants and the way that it naturally sits and looks. And I was like, oh, you know what? I kind of want to do a crevice garden in my front yard where I don't really have like a lot of irrigation, and I could put some more like desert style plantings and add some like height and contrast and beauty. And so like even things like that, like there's certain design principles used in different regions that you could always kind of adapt to wherever you are to really make it work for what you have. And so that was also really fun and inspiring to see people play around with these different ideas.
Yeah, that one in particular, that was Colson's garden. And I had never seen a crevice garden in Texas. So, I go up to Colorado a lot. I've got a daughter who lives up there now, and Texans just love to escape the heat and go up to Colorado anyway in the summertime. And so over the years, I've spent a lot of time like at Denver Botanic Garden and visited private gardens up there. And there's a lot of crevice gardens up there. Like they've really adopted it, and it did come from the alpine. I don't know who started it, but whether it was in Europe or whether it was in Colorado, but it kind of came from that whole gardening scene. And so they are using these mountain adapted plants that want to live in those crevices. And so if you're going to pull that down here to Texas, where you're going to have 100 degrees for 3 months on end, and you got to plant some different plants. And so it was fun to see what Colson did with that, and especially because he wasn't even a gardener when he started. This was his, like COVID garden, because he was at home and he had some time.
Yep.
But the key thing that he had, which was helpful to him, was a neighbor around the corner who's a real plantsman. And so he had the advantage of talking with him about plants that might work. And then Colson himself has a background in sculpture. And he had spent a lot of time in the Mojave Desert. He did some like biology work out there. And then he had this sculptural background himself, which he used to arrange the stone in his garden when he started to make the crevice gardens. And then he could pull on the plant knowledge from his neighbor. So yeah, that was a real creative venture, that whole garden.
Yeah, that one was funny too because he was talking about how he laid it all out and he was like, "Ugh, in the back of my head, like something about this doesn't feel right." And then when his neighbor came over, he's like, "That's wrong."
Yep,
And he's
rip it
like,
out.
"Ah, dang it. I knew it. I knew it."
He
It's
knew
like,
it, yeah.
and they're not small rocks. They're big rocks.
Those
Like
were
it's a
huge
decent
rocks.
amount of work.
I don't even know how he managed to move all that, but
Yeah.
I was
But
impressed. Yeah.
I know that feeling where you're like, I know that I don't like this, but if somebody else says it, then I'm like, okay, for sure.
Now you know it has to be done. Yeah. So either you're going to
Yeah.
hide from that person or you're going to invite them over. I don't know which.
But like kind of bait them into telling you.
Yeah.
But actually another interesting design element. So there's so many that aren't even necessarily like directly stated, but it's like great for your mind's eye to wander through these pictures and like pick and choose different elements that you see. And one of the ones that I really liked that I didn't really think about was, I think it was in the same garden, he used these really tall, they were like rusted pipe essentially, like, but
yeah.
really big pipe, like tall containers that were maybe like 3 feet up off the ground.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, he then put a sotol. I think it's like,
that was a Miller Sodal. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah.
And the cool thing about that plant is that I guess for somebody it's not an agave, it's like, it looks more like a yucca head where it has like all the spikes coming out, if you're not familiar with what sotol is. And it's really cool because you get the height from the plant pot, but then you get this like crazy explosion of texture out the top from the sotol. Even though it's not a tall plant, it looks super cool, like,
It's like
laid
you've given
out.
it a trunk, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, that looks so neat. And like, what a cool idea as a way to use that plant for texture, but you know that it doesn't grow tall, but you could bring it up there by putting a like nice contrasting container like that.
That's a pretty popular look here in Central Texas. You see a lot of steel pipes as planters. You see a lot of stock tanks used as planters. I use both steel pipes and culvert pipes in my own garden. You know, like old sections of those silver galvanized culvert pipes, which I got off like Craigslist or something years ago. And it's just scrap somebody's throwing out. But you can put those in your garden and fill it up with soil. And I like to put really drought tolerant plants in mine because I don't want to be out there hand watering those suckers all summer long. So I like them because you can get a little visual height in a garden that's otherwise flat. Or like in my garden, I've got so many tree roots that sometimes it's really kind of hard to dig. So you could do I like to have potted plants anyway, just to get things up off the ground so I don't have to dig in those roots.
Or compete.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was actually one of the cool things, I think, in a lot of the gardens, I won't say most or all, but a lot of them, including yours, like have big trees. And I'm sure like in the summer, it's amazing to have these big trees and the shade that they throw. But of course, it does present its own challenges in terms of what you can grow. But I loved the look of like the dappled shade and the texture of all these cool tree branches. And it was just like so neat to see people use what they already had on their property and like building around it instead of, I mean, I think there you probably are never wanting to cut down a tree because you want that shade anyway.
Yeah.
But just to kind of work around it.
Here.
Yeah. But they're
do.
beautiful trees. They like the texture and the way that the branches are moving. I can't remember if they were like mesquites or oaks or combinations
you're probably thinking of the live oaks because we did get some
the live
amazing
oaks.
shots
They're so nice.
of those
Yeah.
like undulating branches,
Yes,
in the gardens.
I love it.
Which probably, I mean, I know you guys have live oaks there in California too. I don't know if that's a San Diego thing, but I'm picturing those California live oaks as looking kind of similar, you know?
Yeah.
Just kind of
they're mostly in the foothills.
Yeah, like on the little golden hillside, you'll have one of those beautiful live oaks. Yeah.
Love it.
I got an image in my head. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually another kind of consistent theme, considering this whole idea of you don't know if it's going to rain too much or too little, is this like a lot of people have rain capture or they're planting things that are drought tolerant or they're building in. There was an example of somebody who had like a permeable driveway, which also looked really cool, like visually looked way more interesting than just a concrete slab. But also is like functional because I think the idea was that it was like essentially sections of concrete and then decomposed granite in between so that instead of just being concrete, when the rain does hit, it can drain through that decomposed granite section and then work its way slowly through your garden area instead of all just running off into the wastewater, which also then causes other problems.
Yeah, and that's an idea for everybody.
Yeah.
Like there's so many areas that do see too much rain all at once, and that's definitely a problem here because we'll just get a long drought, and then I mean there's a saying about Texas, which is that it's perennially in drought, broken by the occasional flood. And it's true. Like
that's rough.
We're going to have a bad drought, and then it's going to be broken by this incredibly destructive flood, like we just saw this summer in Texas. And you have to learn, like one of the huge things that every gardener here does is figuring out how to manage the rain or the lack of rain. So you're always thinking about ways of, if you're smart, you're thinking about ways of holding that rain when it does come without causing destructive damage. So you're going to, put in some terracing, or you're going to put in a rain garden, or, you don't want that water to leave your property. I'm sure you're feeling the same way in California. You want to hold on to it and let it soak in slowly and recharge the tree roots and, feed all the plants. So
absolutely.
That garden was interesting too. The one you just spoke of, that was the Janie Orr garden, and her daughter Jennifer Orr designed it for her parents. And she's a landscape architect here in Austin, and she also incorporated, aside from the permeable driveway, she had these really interesting industrially made rain bladders, or they were water catchment rain bladders, and those got tucked under an elevated back porch. So you don't even see them. We weren't able to get a photograph of them,
right.
But she told me about them. And so they've got one of those big metal cisterns in the backyard, but they also have those collapsible bladders, and all the water that comes off the roof feeds into those bladders. It fills them up when it rains, and then the overflow goes into the big tank in the backyard, and then they can draw on that for their irrigation system. So
that's so cool.
Yeah,
it also keeps the water cool by being
Yeah.
hidden under the porch or the deck.
It's hidden. So if you had a small yard
Yeah.
and you wanted to have water collection, but you didn't have room for a big tank, you could maybe put it under your house. It's just something that I hadn't
really
known about
interesting.
before. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many different ways to approach these problems. And I think that first garden we talked about, Ruthie's, she also had a rain capture system. And she even mentioned, I think, that she didn't want to dig a well. She instead wanted to rely on like what was naturally really possible. And I was like, that's really cool too. Just like the respect that a lot of these people have towards like not just their garden, but like Texas and their landscape and the place that they live. You could tell that there was a lot of like intentionality and thought and pride behind what they were doing and how they were doing it. And a lot of that is connected to like being where you are. And it's always, I love when people actually love where they are. And like, they want to support the place and make sure that it's continuing to succeed for the coming future and for whoever else is coming. So it's a great perspective too.
Absolutely. Yeah, she talked about that, right? About,
yeah.
We're leaving this planet to our grandkids, and so everything that you do matters. And she was very eloquent about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I believe your garden is also in there.
It is,
and, in your garden, you said that you were fighting deer and also shade.
Yeah.
So how did you kind of work around those two problems?
Yeah, not fighting so much anymore, for sure. I've come to terms.
Yeah, you've kind of, yeah.
Well, the shade, I came to this house from, I had a sunny, beautiful, flowery garden at my last house. That was my second house. The first one was really just like learning to garden, and I was a total baby gardener just trying. And then we moved to the second house, and I was one of those people that like before I'd even like moved the furniture into the house, I had already drawn out, my new garden. I planned to rip out all the lawn and put in all these flowers and stuff, and I had a really great time, like really learning to be a gardener in that house. And then we moved to this house, and that was in 2008, and it was shade. It was rocky, and it was a hillside in the back, and then there were the deer out front, and so I relearned how to garden. But yeah, I mean, you adapt, you find out. Like here in our climate, as long as you have good drainage, which I do because I'm kind of on a slope, you can plant a lot of like sun-loving. The plants that I love are tend to be agaves and yuccas, and mixed in with like native perennials. That's kind of the look that I love because it's pretty low maintenance.
Yeah, that's a nice bonus that a lot of people, I think, underappreciate.
Especially as you get older.
Yeah, oh, for sure. But I mean, like these native plants, like they're made to grow in this area. And so they tend to not need a lot of handholding once established.
Yeah, if you pick well, right? Because there are a million kinds of native plants, and it's easy to think, well, a native plant means it's going to be perfect. But you still have to choose carefully. And I just say that, I know that you know that, but any listener who might think native plant good, then always make sure you match it to your conditions, because native plants still need to be matched to the sun or to the water level and stuff like that. But yeah, they are good. The one challenging part about native plants, which I'm sure you have in your area too, is that in hot, dry climates, they might go dormant in the summer. That's their survival mechanism. They don't all, but some of them do. And so if you plant this beautiful plant in the spring, or like you're really into like Texas wildflowers or California wildflowers, and you throw out your seeds and you've got this beautiful show in the spring, and then it just goes away in the summertime, that, you know, that could be a surprise. So you do have to think about those things and plan for plants that will take over when the early show is over. And that might be different than like, you know, the easy evergreen shrub that Home Depot sells, because it'll
just
it'll
looks
look
the
good
same
all
around.
year, right?
Yeah.
So it does add in that level of complexity, but it also adds in the reward, because then you get the change with the seasons. You get the wildlife
Yes.
that it brings
The
in.
appreciation of those seasonal shifts
Yeah.
are something I've come to really appreciate more and more. Is sometimes you're like, I just want tomatoes all year. And then after trying to do that garden, because like in San Diego, I can kind of do that, especially with cherry tomatoes.
Wow.
Cherry tomatoes I can. But then it's like I started to lose the appreciation for that tomato from my garden.
It's like Christmas
like,
all
you know what?
year.
Yeah, I'm like, you get sick of it. It's like, now I'm like, oh, I love the brassica season is here. And I like ripped out all my tomatoes, and I'm like, everything is broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower. Like, that's what I'm excited for, because that's what wants to be in the season. But yeah, like the native plants, same deal. Like we have things that we mixed our plantings to make sure that some of the perennial things that don't go drought dormant will still like get enough in that space or fill in that gap. And like the things that do go dormant, it's fine. Like there's plenty of other action going on to kind of make up for it.
Yeah, there's longtime lead horticulturist at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, which is an entirely native plant garden here in Austin. It's the State Botanical Garden. She has a new book out about Texas native plants, and she called it time sharing. So the idea of you'll plant something that will go dormant, and when that goes dormant, you have another plant that comes up right alongside it that fills in. And so they are sharing the same space, but they come up at different times. And so you can pair those plants together if they have the same growing needs, and then you get to enjoy both of them, but they have the seasonal changes. So it's nice to, like in my garden, one of those things is we have a native spring flower that's called heartleaf skullcap, Scutellaria ovata, and it creates these beautiful little blue-green rosettes in the winter, and then they grow taller and taller, and they finally burst into flower in May. And then by the end of May, they're done. They go to seed, they disappear, they go underground for the summertime. And so you've got to have something else nearby to fill in for that. And I like to have Turk's cap, which is just a big, bushy, native, red flowering perennial. And that doesn't come on it really doesn't get going until around May. So they have a nice trade-off.
In kind of the fruit growing world, a lot of people do that with their orchard too, where it's like, I have an apple that's ready in like early fall, and then an apple that's ready in late fall, and another one that's at the end of the season. That way you could, in the same way of thinking, like, I don't want 300 apples at once. I want 100 apples, and then 1 month later, another 100, and then another. Because like you want to like not just get overwhelmed by everything at once. Like you could, like that can be a style, but in the same way, right, in the landscape, that's so clever to think about, like, what is the window of this plant being its best and its best like visual life? And then what is something that kind of picks up right after that, and trying to pair those guys together to really like make your landscape interesting year round. Like there'll be, of course, those like stunning moments, like that early spring season is probably just always going to be the best. Maybe. I don't know, actually.
Fall is my favorite, but yeah.
I agree. Fall is really great here as well because it's still warm enough that a lot of things can grow, but it's not like oppressive. And so the plants tend to be a little bit more relaxed.
October is like the best month in the world, I think. No matter where you travel, October is going to be a good month. That may not be true for gardeners everywhere because I know the farther north you are, you're going to prize, summer, high summer. But as far as just the weather, October, that's where it's at.
I agree. I mean, I was just in Maine in the middle of October and there you get the fall foliage and it's like absolutely beautiful. It's still like a nice temperature in the daytime. But all of them are like, yeah, don't come back. Like if you came here next month, you might not think the same because it's about to get really cold.
Were you just there this fall?
I was, yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, right through the middle of October. And there were still tomatoes on people's plants and, they were still pushing right up to the edge of that season. They were getting their first frosts. But just seeing like the fall foliage and all of that was like just so stunning. So
yeah.
We just don't have that here. Like our fall trees, the trees that are deciduous in San Diego have identity crisis every year because like 1/4 of it will start to turn like red and then the rest of it will be like entirely green and it'll take like 4 or 5 months and like half the tree has leaves, half of it doesn't. It's like, what am I doing here? Like, I don't even know. Should I keep my leaves? Should I drop them? Like even my apple trees.
Sounds like it's really trying to play it both ways.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. Like my apple, like my deciduous fruit trees, like apples and my peach, like sometimes I have to manually remove the leaves like in January because they're still holding on to their old leaves when they're starting to set new leaves.
That's crazy.
Like, guys, you got to move on. You got to move on. It's the new spring. So yeah,
and
like
I bet you don't really freeze. So like, what even is winter for you? Yeah.
Yeah, we get like a light frost. We'll get like I don't think it's even fair to call it a freeze, but I'll have little ice crystals on the ground. But it'll be 32 degrees for like 2 hours right before dawn, and like that's it. It's not like actually cold enough to. It'll occasionally we'll take out a couple plants like a nasturtium that popped up, but no, it's not really in the same way like you were saying with Texas. It can be hard to actually find good gardening advice when you do live somewhere like this because the seasons aren't actually signaling anything to you. There's no like, the zone doesn't mean anything at all because it doesn't help you with any planning. You're just like, It's kind of like this temperature and that temperature. So the main thing you're playing with is like how many hours of light do you have and when can I start my fruiting plants and anything else can go around that basically.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a whole different way of thinking about it.
Yeah. And then in a similar vein, like on the coast, it could be very foggy and kind of damp and you tend to get a lot of fungal diseases. But if you go like sometimes even just like 4 or 5 miles inland, it could be very hot, very dry, entirely different within like the same place. Like a 5-10 minute drive can like entirely change basically what you're gardening in. Could be from like a pretty temperate area to essentially a desert.
I guess this is why they developed the sunset zones or whatever.
I never use them that much, but there's so many sunset zones. They're like very specific because there's so many different like little microclimates. But we don't have to deal with, I think, as big of an extreme shift that you guys get between like that spring, like nice period before it like all of a sudden gets 100 degrees. And then you're like, oh, I better have been prepared and have my stuff planted.
It's about 3 days. It's a 3-day spring and maybe a 1-day fall.
But I mean, like you were saying, like to me, that is what makes the gardening interesting, right? Like if it was super easy and predictable, we'd probably get bored of it.
Oh,
we'd
be so bored. It'd be Christmas every day.
Like,
that'd be
what
like
would we complain about?
Tomatoes
exactly.
all year round. What would we talk about?
If I can't complain about something, what's the point? So
exactly. Yeah.
It's like you need a little bit of balance.
The feeling of achievement, when you
Yes.
thrive despite all the obstacles, it feels good. Yeah.
And growing something that somebody says you can't grow where you are is one of the best feelings as well.
It sure is.
And
we're not competitive in any way.
No. Some people, yeah. I mean, it's so funny to hear like the people who like push zones are always an interesting crowd and how proud they are of like what they've achieved. And I get it. Like I always think of the example of like Elliot Coleman and in one of his books, like I think it was maybe The New Organic Grower, because he gardens in Maine and he was basically had a whole chapter dedicated to saying like, screw you, California, I was able to grow artichokes in Maine. I was like, that's respect. Like, you figured out how to grow this plant that does not at all want to grow there and produce.
Yeah.
And you did it. So like, you deserve a chapter for sure.
Sounds like a funny book.
Yeah, no, he's a very straightforward guy. It's a fun read. I'm looking out at my garden because I'm actually in a shed, my podcasting shed. But outside of my garden, I have this wall. It's not the best looking wall. It's like a cinder block wall that was already there. And it made me think of the section in your garden where you had like a stuccoed wall that was like all blue.
Oh my gosh.
I was like, that's such a interesting idea of like what you had. I don't know if that was something that was already existing.
No, where's your paint can? You need a can of paint right now.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
I went to Tucson for a garden tour. And oh my gosh, the desert gardens there. I mean, they get a lot of structure from the walls. They put in these walls, and they use them as like seat walls. Like they'll be seat height, and then they'll define their gardens. They don't really do like wooden fences there, I guess, because the wood just doesn't last in the desert. So they'll do cinder block, masonry walls everywhere. And a lot of them were colored, these beautiful colors that really went well in the desert light. And so I came home thinking, I got to have some colored walls in my garden. And that's not really a thing here. It's just not. It's not part of our like vernacular, but I was obsessed. And so I found a way to shoehorn in 3 walls. And that blue one is my colorful wall. It's just kind of the backdrop, to the center part of the swimming pool. But then I've got 2 seat walls too that are just gray. But I really love those walls. Like they're a nice little canvas for showing, like in the desert, what they do is they'll have these colored walls. Maybe they'll be vividly colored, like a real bright red. Like if you look at Steve Martino's work in Phoenix, amazing, yeah. And so maybe it'll be a blue wall or a bright red wall or even a hot pink wall, or my favorite was like a school bus yellow wall, which sounds crazy, but I tell you what, they would put these desert plants or like prickly pears in front of those walls. And then you would get the pop of the plant against the colored wall, and you'd get the shadow play because the sun is so intense out there. So it would like cast these incredibly detailed shadows of the plants on the wall, and that would change through the day. Stunning, yeah.
It adds like texture and like contrast.
It adds color if you need it, which a desert garden can be a lot of gray, and we can kind of have that here in Texas too, in Central Texas. Like a lot of our evergreen foliage is kind of a gray green. These are water
or maybe like the dirt's like very red, or like kind of that yellowish pale color.
Yeah, these are just adaptations that the plants have, and so you can instead get color from your hardscaping. Love those walls.
Yeah. No, I love that. That's such an interesting idea because I mean, I wear blue a lot in the garden when I'm filming videos because blue stands out really nicely against all the green that's usually in the garden. So if I wear a green shirt, you might not even see me in my garden. So,
you would just disappear.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't wear green when I'm standing in front of like a bed full of broccoli. I'm like, just blend into the background.
Head.
Yeah.
And your hat.
And so I'm like, it's interesting to think about like, how can I add like these little pops of contrast into the hardscape that I could play with throughout the year.
Yeah,
and that's such a fun idea.
Well, look up Steve Martino and you're going to be super inspired.
Yes, I definitely wrote that down.
And you can paint those walls, and if you decide that color is just horrendous, it doesn't go, it's just paint.
That's
you
true.
Can paint it again.
Yeah,
so,
just paint it again.
Yeah.
It's better than cinder block and stucco. So.
Yeah. I mean, you could do a
I can improve
color
it
too, but
yeah,
I don't know.
Totally.
I'd go with color.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, this book has been extremely fun for me. Just to say the full title again, because I don't actually know if I said at the beginning, it's Gardens of Texas, Visions of Resilience from the Lone Star State. And as I mentioned, again, I'll say it again, the pictures are really great. You guys really got the timing.
Shout out my photographer, Kenny. Kenny did an amazing job. Yeah.
Clearly you understood when to go at the right time and like catch those like beautiful sunset or sunrise colors, and just so dramatic and beautiful, but very inspiring. Like I said, I mean, as you guys have heard, I've already shared a lot of the inspirations I've picked up, and I'm only actually halfway through the book. And so I have more to even pick up from it. But just a really fun read and fun for me to see the gardenscape just in a different state, because I think everyone has their own assumptions of what every state does or looks like or how they garden. And for me, this was really fun and eye-opening to see the entire, like you said, it's such a big state, to see like the desert landscape side versus like the wetter side and the central sections. And they all have their own unique kind of different flair and like challenges that they dealt with. And a lot of those challenges are true everywhere. Like you might have too much rain, or you might not have enough rain, or you might have really hard or no soil or anything like that. The problems are similar across anywhere you are. So there's always something to pick up and learn from it. But it's really been fun chatting with you.
Oh, it's
and
been
also
fun chatting
been
with you too.
really great looking through this book. So definitely would check it out. And thanks for coming on, Pam.
Thank
this
you
was
for having me.
Great conversation.
It was super fun. I want to see a picture of your wall when you get it all painted up.
I was like, I don't know if you want to see it right now. It's pretty boring.
No, you gotta have the
picture
before
cinder
picture
blocks.
too. You gotta have the before.
I always forget the before picture.
Forget,
it's like my worst habit.
Yeah,
I know.
You get to just like, oh, look what I did. Yeah.
I end up just diving in and doing all this work and being like, I forgot the before picture. No, nobody will believe me how impactful this change was.
Nobody will believe. Yeah, well, all right. You just snap it today and then you'll have it.
Yeah. All right.
Fun.
Well, great chatting with you, Pam. And Gardens of Texas. Check out the book. It's a really fun read.
Thanks. Yeah.
And,
Come along
maybe
with
we'll chat
me on
again.
the garden tour.
Hey, yeah. If you're ever doing one, let me know and I'll come by, because I love me a good garden tour.
Me too.
Yeah.
This is why I love to travel
and maybe
for them.
a little
awesome.
San Diego one. Like maybe we
love
could do a little tour up here.
Man,
yeah.
someday. Yeah. I need to get out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. See you, Pam.
Thanks
Have a good
so
day.
much. Have a good one.
I guess I'm off to the garden.
All right. Have fun.